Hi everyone. So I know we just had lunch and we are going to talk about theory, which is apparently the perfect time, right, to talk theory about after lunch. So I'm not going to start with some slide. I'm just going to ask you a first question. I want you to imagine yourself playing a video game and you're in charge of a city on the brink of collapse, right? It's freezing, your people, they are starving, and you have a choice that will guarantee your city survival, but you will find it morally questionable according to your values. So first question, who would make the morally tough choice to ensure survival in the game? No one. All right. Nice. And now, who would hold onto their personal values even if it means everyone might fail in the game? All right. So the other who didn't raise your hand, what would you do? Okay, nice. Nice. So that tension between what a system does in a game and what it means to the player is exactly what we are going to talk about today. So this talk is more of a discussion. It's my humble attempt to bridge two worlds I inhabit. The first one is my academic background in game studies. Game studies is the study of game, the act of playing them, and the player and culture surrounding them. And also my other world, which is the pragmatic, fast-paced reality of game dev. I think we all know that. And the sometimes really rough reality of being a game user researcher in this industry. So what I'm going to talk about today is not a doctrine, right? But it's more of a question I asked myself along the way as I was starting working on emergent, morally driven game. I saw a really exciting opportunity for game user research, an opportunity to complement our existing toolkit with a different set of lenses. So the framework I will share with you, I want you to see this as more of a discussion rather than, okay, this is new tool, you should use it, right? It's more a try to apply academic theory into practical, actionable tool for real studies. So all of this while knowing the production cycles, right? And the limitation of our discipline. So it's a conversation starter. And about how we as a game user research community, we can continue to level up our practice together. All right, so everything started because apparently you have to open a talk with a personal story, so I will do it. Everything started when I was conducting personal interview with players. 12 of them quoted Frostpunk as their favorite game, right? And they all discussed without me prompting them the child labor feature. And what was interesting is that every single one of them perfectly understood the mechanic. They understood the resource benefits, the consequences, and there was like zero comprehension failure. But despite knowing it was often the optimal path for survival, they still all refused to use it. And during this time, I was preparing a PhD on how players make sense of games with moral choices. And for the Frostpunk child labor feature, while compiling my notes, I realized that actually the refusal to use this feature for this player wasn't a usability or understanding or balancing flaw. It was a meaning issue. And this is why in game studies, we call meaning making. Meaning making, this is the process where players interpret game systems and connect them to their own values, identities, and life stories. So imagine in film, for example, in cinema, the meaning it's largely conveyed by the author or the director, right? But in games, meaning emerges through play. The choices players make, the strategy they develop, the story they tell themselves. This is what we call ergodic for the fun world that nobody will remember, but that's okay. So you must work through the system in the game to produce meaning. So meaning making, see it as like, it's often involve player negotiating who they want to be in the system and how action they are going to take, what action they are going to take to kind of feel the persona they want to be in the system. So they will ask themselves, for example, what kind of leader I want to be in Frostpunk? Do I want to use this feature or not? So for this feature, particularly the child labor feature, the players are interviewed, acted on personal values, right? Not just on the system logic. The sentence child labor was a powerful word that the games rule for them to come from. So even knowing it was by design, right? There was a feature to provoke some kind of discomfort. I still ask myself, as a user researcher, how do I report this? Like, how do I explain to stakeholders that a feature was avoided, not because it was misunderstood, but because of what it meant for some players? And while our game user research toolkit is incredibly strong at measuring comprehension, games, morally driven games, emergent games, they are evolving. And I think that we might need to also try to measure the meaning through interpretation, how players interpret the system, and understand if a player do something, what kind of meaning they construct from the thing that they are playing. And this leads to our question for today, which is, how do we go beyond measuring if players understand a system to also capture the meaning they create from the experience? All right. So we all know here that modern games, right, and especially morally driven and emergent games, today they are just not about comprehension. They tackle ethics, they tackle emergence, they tackle creativity. And this is not unique to Frostpunk, even though I love this game and you will see will be our main example. For example, in this War of Mine, you might have player understanding the survival mechanics, but refuse to steal from the helpless. In Rimworld, you have this random AI events, and player might interpret personal story of betrayal, of resilience, and so on. Or in Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, you see players subverting mechanics and find meaning in creative invention. And I don't know if you saw like the creation player made in Zelda. It was really funny. I invite you to check it out. So a player can fully understand a mechanic and still reject it or subvert it because of what this mechanic means to them. And one example I love to take is the Animal Crossing Black Lives Matter protest that happened a few years ago. This is typical meaning-making moment. You have the game that provides a neutral tool, which is My Island. And you will have player recontextualizing it into a protest ground. You have the game that provides a neutral tool, which is the signpost. And you will have the player recontextualizing into a protest sign. So this is typically co-creation of meaning. And to understand this, we need to go beyond surface friction. And this is where ludology and play theory can become interesting tools. All right, really quickly, because it's definition of a theoretical term, but ludology, it comes from game studies, and it's the study of games as rule-based systems, right? It asks basically, how do mechanics create meaning through the act of playing? On the other hand, you have play theory. Play theory is also a field of game studies and sometimes ludology, but it focuses on the player's subjective experience. How do players interpret those rules to find freedom, agency, personal significance, and so on? It mingles sociology, anthropology, and psychology. You can see here a quick recap of their influence in interdependencies. All right, so, oh, sorry. Sorry, let's go, take your time. Is it okay? It's okay. All right. So, as I said before, morally driven game, emergent game, they are not just puzzles to be solved, okay? They can be arguments, they can be moral laboratories, and they can be spaces for self-expression. So, for this type of game, if we stop at usability or understanding measurement, we might miss some very things that make players return, recommend, or reject a game. And to kind of help us visualize this, I kind of made this 5-layer lens, and you will see you know absolutely all of them, but still, it's just a way to visualize. It's a way to go beyond, as I said, usability and right. It's a way to go beyond usability and capture the deeper dimension of the player's experience. So the goal here is to really have this framework to visualize how we measure meaning in games, right? The first layer that you have is behavior. This is what the player did, right? So the click, the path, and so on. Now I'm afraid to change the slide if you're taking picture. The second layer is understanding. This is how players think the system works. This is the mental model. This is the rule. This is classic UX testing, and we need it. We should do it all the time if we can, right? Finally, you have the layer 3, which is interpretation. This is where this is the ludology layer. This is where rules become statements about values. What does this mechanic means to the player? How did they make sense out of what they played? We will see it afterwards. It's a bit of a spoiler here. We have attitude, qualitative ground, okay, how do players self-report, experience, and it's hours to decode as well. And then you have insights. So does the player interpretation and feedback align with the designer's intent? This is where we find critical dissonance. and general true value. So just as a takeaway to this framework, well, behavior and attitude, they tell us what the player did, right, and say about their experience. Interpretation, so the meaning-making system, it will tell us what it meant for them. What does this action mean for the player? Why do we have a player accepting a critically moral choice and the other one just looking for a path to mastery, for example? So this is where, as I said, ludology and play theory can help us. And I would like to propose 2 tools that we can experiment while working on games where emergence and moral choices are at the core of the gameplay. The first one is called micro-story elicitation. It's a complicated name. I don't know why I pick up this name, but I will explain it with the definition. No worries. So this first tool will tackle emergence. And you might ask, okay, why should we even try to measure emergence experience? Well, first thing is that it drives retention, right? Some games put emergence at the central core of how players experience freedom, creativity, and so on. It drives the player-generated stories that create long-term engagement. Think, for example, of Roblox, where you see players actually creating inside the game their own game. The second argument of why should we measure immersion would be, well, it ensures the continuity of UX, right? If emergent systems feel like confusing chaos, they can break the player's experience. And finally, this third argument, it validates systemic design. This is a more like a product question. It answers the question from the dev team, okay, did the expensive, resource-consuming, complex sandbox we built actually matter to the player? So this method is called micro-story elicitation, as I said. And we use game user research as a really solid foundation for here. We can measure how players complete objective, how they interact with system to uncover any frictions and issue. And with this tool, actually, we also try to capture the story they believe just unfolded and why it unfolded according to them. This extra layer, it will help us see how players interpret a system, not just how they navigate through it. So this method moves us, and you will see these 2 methods are kind of linked to Think a Lot protocol. We will develop a bit, but this method moves us from observing, understanding actions, to also deep diving into the player's unique, often deeply personal interpretation of events. So how would you do that, right? Well, it's grounded in theory. But it's not about adding new questions. It's about reframing our analytical objective and grounding it into ludology. So the method in practice could be, in Think Aloud, when a critical incident occurs, we can prompt, okay, tell me the story of what just happened. And then we will code the player's inference chain, meaning their causal explanation. And we will map it against the system actual values. An inference chain is just simply the consequence of cause and effect. The player imagine to explain what just happened. And why is it linked to the discipline of ludology? Well, it's because ludology says that players don't just use rules, they interpret them. The narrative are acts of ludic meaning making. So here what we are going to do is we are going to ask ourselves, okay, what system did the players think they were playing? And the gap between the actual system and the perceived system is where meaning is produced. Let's take Frostpunk again. Okay, imagine once again a critical moment in the game. The temperature plummets, and despite your best effort, citizens, sorry for that, are starting to die from frostbite. This is a classic emergent event, right? And a game user researcher, myself first, I might log this as a friction moment, maybe a difficulty spike for some player. But with this tool, the micro-story elicitation, we lean in and ask, okay, tell me the story of what you think just happened. Why did your people die? And then this is where it becoming really interesting and we capture crucial data. One player might say, well, you know, the game is just cruel and unfair. And the micro story is one of random punishment. They see the system as opaque and hostile. On the other end, we will might have another player facing the exact same mechanics and telling us a different story. Well, I didn't manage hope properly. My people gave up on me. So this story of this player is about systemic cause and effect and their own failure as a leader. This is the perfect example of how 2 players engaging in completely different leading making moment from the same exact mechanic. So by capturing the story, we didn't just log a failure or friction point. We tried to understand the mental model of the game's rule, and in doing so, we tried to capture data that help us predict the long-term engagement. And you might think, I know, reading your mind, don't you think it's a bit subjective to be reliable data? Well, that's a fair question. But the key here is that subjectivity can be the data, right? Games don't just deliver uniform outputs, they invite interpretation. So to capture this rigorously, we don't stop at anecdotes. We code players' interpretation into structured categories. Did they see the system as random, punitive, or intentional? They frame this as failure, bad luck, or poor strategy. Can I change the slide? And you also might ask yourself, like, okay, what is it interesting? Why do we care about that? We have so many things to do. It's so complicated to add another layer and another kind of like method for this type of game. Well, interpretation and meaning making, it can predict engagement. If a player believes that the game is random and cruel, they're likely to churn. If one believes, I failed to manage moral, I failed to manage my colony, there seems maybe a path to mastery, and they will keep playing. So in conclusion, for this tool and Ludology doesn't just explain what happened, it can help us hypothesize what will happen next when it comes to meaning and player experimenting those mechanics. Great, another tool. I know you like that, right? And it's a bit less complicated in terms of the name, but it's called ethical dissonance probing. And this is for game that, as I said at the beginning, have like some kind of moral choices. And it's here to help us understand the tension between game systems and players' personal values. And it's especially useful when creating persona for complex game. So here what we want to do is we want to isolate the value conflict as a distinct measurable variable. And we might ask the player, does this choice just align with what you wanted to play? Did it force you in a direction you wouldn't normally take in this type of game? And this pinpoint friction point where the system optimal path clashes with the player moral compass, this is what we want to kind of discover here. Once again, you might ask yourself, okay, why would you do that? Like, why does it matter? Well, because today, some game, and especially morally driven game, they act some kind of what I like to call game moral as moral laboratories. And why do we care about personal values in this context of game user research? Well, because some games are spaces where players negotiate identity, they negotiate values, they negotiate ethics, and so on. Also, more on the pragmatic side, it explains some kind of retention, right? Not just usability. This is the moments where players are talking about your game in reviews. They are talking about your game in forum. They're talking about your game to their friends. So if this tension feels meaningful, players stay and reflect on it. If it feels manipulative and unfair, they might churn. So measuring this ethical layer, let us predict what probably they will go. And finally, because this tool is really fun to experiment with persona, not all players respond to moral dilemmas in game the same way, right? We know that there's cultural background, sociological background on why a moral choice will be, I don't know, important for one player and not important for another. So we will see that some player will optimize survival, other will play values, and without measuring, or at least trying to measure this ethical interpretation, those kind of differences stay invisible, but they're crucial for this type of game because this is moral-driven game. Okay, so once again, why is it about, like, what is it new about this? Well, this approach comes once again from the field of ludology, right? No surprise from here. It shows us how the rule and systems themselves produce meaning, sometimes in conflict directly with the player values. So play theory and ludology reminds us that play is an exploration of identity. And how, is it okay? Can I change again? Yes, I feel like it. And how do we do that, right? How do we capture this? Well, this method is once again linked to Think Aloud protocol, but retrospective Think Aloud protocol, or what we call auto-confrontation. But we sharpened it with this ludological lens, right? What we're gonna do, what I did with my players, is that the first thing I record and replay facing a moral choice, right? We record it, immediately replay it with the participant. Then we probe the value conflicts. We mean that we don't ask like, okay, what happened here? We will ask something like this choice asks you to act against one of your values, and why, right? We don't necessarily need to ask what value, because this is personal meaning. We will see it afterwards. But we'll ask, okay, did it actually put you in a discomfort situation? And finally, what we do is like we code systematically. And this is the key to rigor, right? We transform raw subjective accounts into a structure data set by coding reflection along 3 dimensions. For example, first one, values invoked, right? That it did invoke fairness, loyalty, survival. The second value might be, I don't know, intensity of dissonance. We saw low hesitation, visible distress, refusal to use this feature at all. And finally, what we can see is the resolution path. So did the player accept this mechanic finally? Did they reject it? How did they interpret it? And once again, this is moving beyond tracking action to understanding the cognitive and emotional load created by game system. Once again, let's take Frostpunk, right? During our sync load, player hesitated over the child labor feature, okay? And at this moment, we ask, okay, what do you think this choice means for your city? And the prompt zeroed in example, zero value conflict, confirming a state of ethical non-dissonance, but it can be the other way around. So the personal value were in direct conflict with the game proposed optimal path or not. In this case, they were not. And this analysis is not to, and we'll see it afterwards, it's not like to judge which values are good or bad, right? It's a way to segment players into way more detailed categories for this type of game. And it's a really powerful insight than just like measuring if they like this type of game. It gives us like more density into how we segment the players. And now you might be seeking, once again, isn't this like too subjective again for this type of study? And you're right, because values are by their nature subjective. But here's the take. Subjectivity here is also the data, and it doesn't mean it is noise, right? It's data that reflects not only individual identity, but also broader cultural, social forces shaping how players interpret system. And this is just as psychology, for example, treats self-reports as valid data on internal state. And for example, how anthropology codes personal narrative into pattern. We can do the same here, or at least we can try to do the same here. And as I said, this method, it's not about judging if values are good or bad. It's primarily a limit, and we shouldn't like put a judgment on it. But it helps us map conflict point. So we treat values as data, right? Not endorsement. And what would you do with this data, you might ask? Well, first thing we do is that we find patterns. So after coding, it becomes clear or not if the mechanic is constantly interpreted as unfair or cruel. Then we segment our player. I told you this method was really useful for persona, for example. So in Frostpunk, we found that optimizers accepted the choice, while what we will call, I don't know, moral leaders might have rejected it. This tells the team, okay, your system is not broken, but it creates a distinct identity-driven path. And we can also say, players didn't quit because it was too hard, right? They quit because they felt forced to violate some kind of their values. And this reveals a design opportunity for an alternative moral pathway for progression, for example. So yes, this method, I know when there's, well, ethic in it, we are very careful. But we have also to be aware that games today, some games at least, carry ethical weight, right? Ignoring this dimension will leave us blind. So this is the first step to come of ask ourselves, how can we measure this, right? How can we, in a way that is rigorous, transparent, and useful for the design, kind of ask ourselves, how do we measure this type of game? How do we measure the experience for this type of game? This is a summary here for you to take picture if you want. I'm watching you taking picture. All right. This is almost the end of the talk. So, the first thing I would like us, as game user researcher, and even designers actually, ask ourselves is like, okay, As I said, some games, they're getting more and more complex. But this is, for us, new opportunities, right? We see perfectly in game user research, like the what's with incredible clarity, so what the player do. But how can we also capture, for this type of game, emergent, morally driven game, how do we access the player's internal interpretation step? So this approach is actually built upon our foundation, right? It's not to replace it, all right? So this tool, they are designed to fill a why, revealing the beliefs and interpretation behind some behaviors of our players. And when we bring these layers together, I noticed in my work that we achieve some kind of a fuller, more nuanced picture, taking under consideration cultural differences, social differences, and so on, even gender differences. So we can provide a deeper diagnosis for the team, and we can distinguish between a usability issues and a value-based conflict, giving the design teams, especially for this game, because they are so eager to listening to what choices player made for based on the feature. So we can provide the design team into more precise feedback. But of course, I have to put it here. We have limitation with this approach of ludology and play theory, right? The first one is purely practical. This is methods that are qualitative heavy and can be resource intensive, especially if, as Jean-Luc just stated this morning, you have to first fight to say, okay, maybe we should do UX, but you know. So this is, there's limitation for that, right? They do generate deep insight based on what I apply to my team, but this from smaller samples of player and not broad trends. And we know that we have to fight to like show how qualitative feedback is important, right? So this is the first limitation. The second one is like, we are working on a very fast-paced environment, and this application is still experimental. I have the privilege to test them because I work in a small studio where I have a lot of freedom on this type of game, but I know they require analytic skill to be truly effective, and also time and resources to do it. And finally, the most important that I really want you to get at the end of this talk is that these tools, they are not meant to extend, right? They are meant to extend, and complement classic game user research, not replace it. They don't work with all the game, right? And they work best actually when our deep insight from quantitative, qualitative, informed and validated by other studies that we have conducted. So here's some key findings, key takeaways. The first one is that the meaning making give us access to the deeper layer of the player's experience. It's while measuring understanding, which is really important, shows what players can do. This notion of meaning making and how do players interpret system, it helps us see why actually it matters to them. Why does it matter to the player to come back to a morally driven game? And often something that I've seen is that you can have player coming back to a game and changing the overall choices they made in the past. So this meaning making add this deeper layer and the reproducibility of the experience. The second would be equip your team with Ludology inspired tool when you can. I don't know how, but I encourage you to do it. But for example, if you work on a morally driven game, like try to integrate in your think aloud, this kind of probing. Try to code based on one of the tool. Just try to broaden the view of, okay, players experiencing game in a different way based on so many different factors, right? And finally, try to interpret it into this layer. So we don't leave behavior, we don't leave usability, but we might try if we have time and resources to go deeper and find the meaning out of it. So, as I said, I feel like I'm saying it all the time, but the game industry, right, is becoming more and more creative. So delivering more and more complex emergent games. So our opportunity here as game user researchers, this is huge. We can measure the actions on screen and also the stories and meaning player creates through this action. And because we can both capture behavior and meaning, we expand our role. We know that a game user researcher, we need to always prove ourselves somehow, and we need to also expand our roles. Helping team for this type of game craft experience that not only work, but resonate, endure, and truly matter for the player. Because finally, this meaning the players are creating are also part of the experience for them. Thank you.
Awesome. So we have a bunch of questions. All right, let me sit down. Ooh, that's tall. All right. Woo. That's better. Okay, so Morgane, great talk. Question: how does microstory elicitation differ between something like Frostpunk and a very narrative-heavy game like Mass Effect?
Oh, that's interesting. So for Frostpunk, you have like I think that it's a matter of design intent. For Frostpunk, you have the moral choices, like at the core of what the developers want to provide in terms of players' experience. In Mass Effect, you also have this type of, let's say, quest where you can be either bad or good agent Shepard, right? But the difference is that it's not at the core of the design itself. It's like the prolongation of the story, of the narration. So actually it can be just as interesting, but you will have to keep in mind that the story is like on a broader system itself. It's not like in Frostpunk, for example, you have the system, some system resolve around you making choices, around you just being able to, as I say, compromise on all your values. But in Mass Effect, this is narration. But actually, it's a lot of talk to say that we can also apply this. I never applied it to narrative game, but this is also like something that we can apply to narrative game.
Thank you so much. There are a bunch of questions, but I'm seeing the time turning, and we have to prepare for the Pacheco session. So if you have any more questions for Morgane, please take them for to the next break. And thank you again so much. Thank you, Morgane.